Alright, welcome to this channel. In today's video, I'll be talking about functions. So we continue in our series of learning C programming, and today I'll be focusing on functions. So what is a C function? A function is a block of code which only runs when it is called. You can pass data into a function. These data are known as parameters or arguments. So as you proceed in this lecture, you will understand what parameters really means or arguments. Functions are used to perform certain actions, and they are important for reusing codes. That is, define the code once and use it many times. Now, you may want to do a particular operation in your program, say 100 times. Your program will look so bulky if at every point you need that particular operation or that action, you write the same block of code again. So you're writing the same block of code 100 times. But when you have just one function, you define the code, the function just once, and anytime you need it, you just call the function. So a function is a block of code which only runs when it is called. So you just call it and use it, and once you are done with it, you continue with your program. Any other instance you need it, you call it again. So you define the code just once and use it many times. That's the reason why you need a function. That's why you need to learn how to use functions in C programming. And so types of functions, we have two major types of function. We have the standard library functions and the user defined functions. The standard library functions are the inbuilt functions in C programming. So the designers of C programming language have some functions that they have already put into the package. So they are the inbuilt functions in the C programming or in C programming. The prototype and data definition of these functions are present in respective header files. I'm sure by now you should be familiar with header files. We've worked with the standard input output header file in my previous video. You can check it out. So to use the function, we need to include the header file in our program. So these are functions that are inbuilt in the C package, and to use them, you need to just include the appropriate header file. While the user defined functions are functions that are defined by the programmer. So you design and you define those functions by yourself. When this function is invoked or called from any part of the program, it is executed, and the code defined in the body it executes the code defined in the body of the function. So in this particular tutorial, I will show us how to work with standard library functions and how to even design or define our own functions and work with user defined functions. So standard library function, this is an example of a standard library function. Number one, put char. The put char function writes a single character to the standard output stream. So we have several, as I've said before, we have several standard library functions that come with the C package that designers of C have written. But we'll just be looking at one or two of them and to see how they are used. So this one is called put char, and its function is to write a single character. Is to write a single character to the standard output stream. So it's just like printing out a single character. In my previous video, we'll be making use of a function known as printf. Printf is also in the standard library function. In fact, for you to use it, you have to include this standard io.h, remember. So similarly, this put char, for you to use it, you have to include this standard io.h. And that's why I say to use this function, the standard input output.h or the standard out.h header file must be included in your program. So once you include this header file, you are free to use this particular inbuilt standard library function. Now the definition, this is how it is defined. It returns an integer. The name is putchar, and it takes in one argument or parameter. I talked about argument and parameter in my previous slide. Now argument or parameter is what you pass into the function. So in this particular function, you are passing just one argument, and that argument is of data type int, is an integer, and we gave it a name character. You can give it any name. This is just a variable. So it's of data type integer, and this is the variable. So this is how to define the putchar, or this is how the putchar library function is defined. So this is the function prototype. This is what we call function prototype. So it gives you a picture of how it was defined. Now, this is an example of how to use this putchar function. You first of all include the standard input output header file. So you include this. Remember, I said in my previous videos that your main function begins to run from your program begins to run from your main function. And so once you run your program, it starts from your main function. The first thing it sees now is put char. So we are calling this function. It sees put char, and the argument we are passing is a character which is capital letter D. So it sees put char carrying just one argument. Remember I said the put char function collects just one argument, or we can call it parameter. So it collects just one, it takes in just one argument, which is a character. Remember, you may be confused saying, if it's taking in a character, then why is it of data type integer? Now every character has an equivalent value, an equivalent integer value, and we call those values the ASCII value, the ASCII codes, or the ASCII values of the character. So the equivalent character value of D is what is going to be returned. That's why we're using integer. So you just have to know that why it takes in an integer. Even if it's a character you are putting there, it is going to just take in the value of that character, its equivalent value. And so this put char you are calling here takes in just one argument, which is capital letter D. Now it's going the function is going to say what is put char. It doesn't know what is put char, so it's going to check, oh, in my header file I've already included standard input output header file, and inside it understands what put char means. So it's just going to do what put char is to do. And what does put char do? It writes a single character to the standard output stream. And so that's all about this. You can check external materials for more functions in the standard input output library. So we've used two functions now. In our previous video, we've used printf function, which is inside this standard input output library. And now we are making use of putchar, which is also inside this library. So we'll be taking one example. I believe when we take an example, you understand how to work with this library. So I fire up my terminal. In my terminal, I navigate into my um, directory C programming. Remember, I said I'm writing all my programs in C programming. So I use CD C programming, and I'm inside the directory C programming. So I want to write a new um, program, a new C program, and I want to name the file functions.c. So I own my VI text editor. You can use Emacs, you can use Vim, whichever works for you fine. So this is VI function.c. So I've created the file function.c, and now this is where I write my code. In order to save time, I've written the code already in my notepad, so I'll just copy it and explain. So this is the file and the code here. I just copy this, and I paste it in my web terminal in my VI text editor, and I explain. Let me quickly format it and correct any error. All right. Um. All right. So this looks good. Okay. Let me quickly work on this to make it look more organized. Then this is happening because I copied it. If I had written this file fresh, everything would have been much more aligned. And so all right, everything looks fine now. So let me quickly explain this program. I've explained it before, but I'm going to run it now so that you see the output. We first of all included the input output library. This is a library that stores, inside this library we have several functions. We have a number of functions, of which putchar is one of them. And so when you run the program, this is your comment. We're working with standard library function putchar. So when you run your program, it goes into your main function. It sees a function call. This is what is called a function call. When you write an existing function, you call it. So it calls this function putchar, and it takes an argument capital letter D. And so it says, oh, this putchar quickly goes into this include standard input library and sees that, oh yes, this putchar function exists there. And so it just does what it's meant to do. And what is it meant to do? It's meant to output the character, or whatever the argument on the output stream. So it just prints this character out and it returns nothing. So quickly I want to run this code, I press escape colon w key to save and exit. And so to run my program I use gcc function rather dot c. So I compile the program. It was compiled successfully. So if I list my function, you can my the content of this directory, you can see this a dot out file there. So to run it, I press dot slash a dot out. Once I press enter, you can see it ran the program and it printed d, which is the tags we need. We want to put sharp print out whatever character you put inside the the function. And so we put capital letter D and it's printed capital letter D. The reason why it's having this on the same line is because I did not put my new line character. So I go back to the function, I open with vi function.c, and I come here to change the character. So now I've changed the content to capital letter F. So I exit and save, and I run it again using gcc function.c. So once I run it now, I also try to, it gives me my executable file, which is my a dot out file. To run the file, I press dot slash a dot out. Once I press enter, it runs. You can see F. It changed the output. So that's the function of your put char function. It's a standard. Is one of the standard library functions that helps you to just write out a single character to the standard output stream. So it's more or less like printing out a character as an output. Yeah. So the next one I'm talking about is lower. Is lower is one of the functions in the standard library. It's one of the standard library functions. The is lower function checks whether a character is a lowercase alphabet, that's between a lowercase a to z, or not. So once I have a character, if I pass in a character into this function, it checks if that character is lowercase or not. To use this function, the ctype.header file must be included in your program. So if I want to make use of this function, the standard library function is lower, I must include the ctype.h function. That is where this function has been designed or has been stored already. All right, so the definition is similar to the put char. It returns an integer. The name of the function is lower, and it takes in an argument. This argument is a character, but because we are telling that the data type of what the argument is an integer, so it's taking the integer um, corresponding value of the character, which is the ASCII value. All right, so this is a note. Even though is lower takes an integer as an argument, exactly, character is passed to the function. So this is what I'm trying to say. Even if it's an integer that is the parameter, the data type of the argument or the parameter that is being passed is an integer. It's a character that is actually passed into this function internally. The character is converted to its ASCII value for the check. So this is just what I was trying to explain both in this particular live function and the previous one put char, that it is a character that is passed in and it is converted to the ASCII value. All right, so this is just an example. You define or you include your library ctype.h. This is a library that stores this function is lower, and inside your main function you put your block of code. All right, note this: if for this particular function is lower, if the character that you pass into the function is a lowercase, that means if character is a lowercase, is lower returns a number greater than 0. But if character is not lowercase, is lower returns 0. So if the character I passed in here was a lowercase, it return a value greater than 0. And if it is not a lowercase value, or a character rather, it returns 0. So you can check external materials for more functions in the ctype.h library. So let's quickly try another example. Still, all right, let me put a new function, let me create a new file, call it function 1.c. So function 1.c, I run function 1.c. I've written the code before, so I just come to my notepad and copy it. So I have the code here already. I just copy it and I will explain. Coming over here, I enter my insert mode and I paste this here. So I do a very quick formatting. just to make sure everything looks okay. um I'll do that again, I think. All right, so I also format um the the what's it called now, the comments, so that we have a very organized program. All right, just to make sure everything looks organized. That's the function of this, and this is happening because I copied it and not that I typed it afresh. So everything looks fine now. All right, so now this is my main function. Inside my main function, I declared a variable called ch of data type character char, and I equated it to capital letter D. Now I created another variable called return underscore val, and I it's of data type integer. Is the function, what this does is to store the return value. So let me just put that in a comment here. So stores stores the returned value. So that's whatever value this function is lower returns, it is stored inside this return function. So now this return variable, rather return underscore value variable. Now after the declaration we leave a space, then we come here. This return underscore value should be equal to is lower. Now this is where we called the is lower. Now this is how programming works. It works from right to left. So when you write a line of code, it goes to the right side of the code. Like this particular first one here, this line of code, it goes to the right side of the code and takes this D and put it into what is at the left character. That's how it works. So here it goes, it runs is lower, and the argument or the parameter I'm passing is ch. What is ch? D. So the same thing as writing is lower and I put D here. So I'm passing D into is lower. When it runs this, it sees okay, we are inside we have declared the C type library, the C type.h library, where this function is lower exists or has been stored already. So it runs it and it returns a value. Remember I said it is not a lowercase value, it returns zero, and if it's a lowercase value, it returns a number greater than zero. So after it runs the program, it gets the value. Since this is not a lowercase value, this is capital letter D, it's not lowercase, so it's going to return zero, because zero, it returns zero if it is not a lowercase. So if it is not lowercase, its lower return zero, so it's going to return zero. It is that zero that is now going to be stored inside this return value variable that we've declared already. So return value is going to carry the value zero, because this is not a lowercase. If this were to be a lowercase, after running is lower, return value is now going to carry a number greater than zero. It could be one, two, or whatever. It's not specific for this particular functions, but just know it's going to be a number greater than zero. So once we've done it, in this case return value is going to take zero because it's not a lowercase. Then we print. Now for us to use printf function, we've been using it in our previous videos. So to use printf function, you have to include this standard input output library. Remember, this library is used to print out, it stores functions that helps to print out to the output stream. So printf is one of those functions, and so that's why I also have this included. But remember, this one here, ctype.h, is for this is lower um function. All right, so printf returns. Now inside our printf, we put what we want to print. We want it to print a string, that is return value is whatever has been returned here. Now we put a placeholder. I've explained this in my previous video that you have to put a placeholder where the value is going to be stored, and percentage d is a placeholder for an integer. And remember, the return value is an integer because zero is an integer, so we put a placeholder. So it's going to be return value is, instead of zero we put the placeholder. I want it to go to a new line. So now what is the value that we want to put inside this placeholder? That is return value. So return value is, once you see this placeholder, it's going to go to the first order parameter that is there, which is return value, and it puts the content here. So its return value is zero. That's what we're going to get when we run this program. All right, so going down, after we've gotten our return value at this point, we now said if return value is 0, it should print percentage C. Now is another placeholder for character. And what character do you want to store inside this placeholder? I want to store the content ch. What is the content ch? D. So it's going to just print D is not a lowercase letter. That's if the return value was 0, it will print D, which is the character, which is ch, is not a lowercase letter, and it goes to a new line. That's the meaning of this slash n. This is a new line character. I've said all these things in my previous videos. So else, if value is equal to 0, you should do this. But if value is not equal to 0, you should print D is a lowercase letter. Of course, you remember that I said if value is not 0, that means if it is greater than 0, that means it was a lowercase letter. So take note of these points very well. That's the way it was designed. So now that it is not, if it's not 0, that's when to print it. But because now it's going to be, it's 0, and it's going to be, the return value is 0. Why? Because this is a capital letter, not a lowercase. So when it runs its lower, it sees that this is a capital letter, it returns 0 and stores the 0 inside its value, and now it prints this particular one because it's 0 that was stored inside return value. So return value is equal to 0. So for you to see the outcome, I go to this. I just hope you understand. If you don't understand, you watch the video again and again, things will become clearer. All right, save and exit, and after that I compile my function1.c file. After compiling it, it compiles successfully. Of course, I've generated my executable file here, and so I run it with ./a.out. Pressing enter, you can see the first thing it's printed was return value is 0. Remember, I told you to print return value, and it's now printed D is not a lowercase letter. So you can see that it printed D is not a lowercase. Take note of this. It first of all printed the return value, then it went to a new line and printed D is not a lowercase value. Let's check the function again. So going back to the function, to our VI, you can see that I first of all told it to print. The first thing I told it to print was to print return value, and that's why it printed return value is 0. Then because the value is 0, since return value is 0, that's when it's now printed in the new line. I told it to go to a new line, and that's why it printed D, which is a placeholder for the character D, is not a lowercase. So now let me try something. Let me quickly change the value here to a lowercase character, and let's see if it's going to work very well. So if I change it to a lowercase d, this is now a lowercase d. Let's see the whole stuff is going to adjust itself. Remember, we're still on the standard library function. This was not defined by us. It's something that has already been in the ctype.h file, the header file already. So now I run this file, this program using GCC function.c, function1.c. All right, and so it runs it successfully. Then I run the executable file ./a.out, and you can see return value is 512. Remember I said that if character is a lowercase, return value is greater than 0. So it decided this time to return 512. And that time it can return something else provided it's greater than 0. And now I change it to lowercase d is a lowercase letter. So d is a lowercase letter. You can see that that program worked very, very well. All right, so that's what this function is trying to say, is lower function under the standard library function. But now let's get to what we really need. This video is the major thing we need is to know how to work with user defined function, because you'll be writing your own functions. It's not every time you'll be working with standard functions. You want to write your own function. So this part is very important. User defined function. Now the syntax to write your own function is just this. You have to have your return type, then you have to have your function name, then inside your bracket you put how many parameters you want to, or arguments you want. So you, of course, you have to put the type of the argument, the data type of the argument, so type 1, type 2, or whatever. Then you have your body of the function. So an example, first of all, a good way to do this in C programming is to first of all define your function prototype. So you can write something like this just to tell the program that there's a function that has this structure. This is just the prototype. So its return value is integer, so it's going to return an integer. The function name is students underscore grade, so student grades. Then the parameters, the first one is a character, that's the type one is character, and the argument is going to receive is a character the variable student name. So student name to is a character. Then the other one is a float, data type float, which is student score. Of course, student score can be decimal, that's why I'm using a float. So this is just the function prototype, just to tell us that okay, there's a function that will be defined in this program. And now this is now the function definition and body, the same thing you have here, but now instead of putting this semicolon to as we did in the prototype, we will open a block of code using open and close curly brackets. And so this is where we're going to put our block of code. I think when we do an example, you will understand. Let's quickly check this example. Now remember we just worked on a function from the standard library functions called islower. Now we want to write our own function islower. So our own version of that function. But we cannot use islower because islower is also already a reserved word. It's already inside the standard library. So we are going to change our own name to underscore islower. So we want to do this. We want to have the goal is to create our own version of the standard islower function. So that function that you played with in the previous example I did, we want to write our own version. So our function will also check whether a character is lowercase or not, just like the standard islower function did. So to do that, I come here and I want to create a new file. I use my VI to create a new file. Let me call it function2.c, and I've written the code already. So I just come to my notepad and copy it, and I'm going to explain everything. So this is it. I've copied it. I've written the code that does that for us. So I just copy it and I'll come over to my VI text editor, and there in my VI text editor, I am going to paste it there. All right, so I've pasted it there already. And so as you can see, I have it there. So quickly, I want to quickly format and make everything look organized. So I have this. All right, so I also want to organize the comments. The comment also looks rough, so just to make sure everything looks organized. I've said it before that because all this happens because I'm copying. All right, this looks okay, so let me quickly put this there. Don't worry, I'm going to explain everything. Let me just set it up well. Because I copied from Notepad, that's why it's coming out this way. So let me just quickly make everything look organized a little bit, and I explain the code. All right, so this looks fine now. All right, so now I explain the code. This is the function prototype. The function I'm trying to work on is underscore is lower, and my underscore is lower returns an integer, and it takes in an argument, and the argument is an integer also. So the argument is an integer. So this is just my prototype. Now coming down here is where I defined the body of this function. This is my own function, the way I want the function to work. So remember I showed you the syntax. The syntax in the previous slide says we have our return type, we have our function name, and then we have the body like this. And so this is the function now. This is where I'm defining my user function. So take note of this part and understand what is going on here. So inside the body, I've already told us what this is. It's taking an argument, just one argument. Now inside the body, I I created a variable called I of data type integer, and I stored a value of lowercase a. Of course, this is a character. Why should a character be stored in data type int? I said that it's going to take the ASCII value, which is the equivalent integer value of this character. So a has an equivalent integer value. That's what is going to be stored in I. So it's not necessarily a as in a character that will be stored in I. It will be the integer value of a that is going to be stored in I. And so I has a, let's just take it like that. So what is stored in I is lowercase a. So we run through a while loop. I've talked about while loop in my previous video. You can check it out. while in this while loop we check the condition that while I is less than or equal to lowercase z. So a is actually less than or equal to lowercase z, because the way it works is that, for example, if this small letter a is 98, for example, let's assume this is the integer value. You can check it online, I'm not sure of that value, but let's assume the integer value of a is 98, b will be 99, c will be 100. So it follows an order. So if I is less than or equal to z, that means it is a at the moment. A is actually less than in hierarchy. A is less than z. So if a is I, that means if I, the content of I, which is a, is less than z, then you should run this block of code. So you should go through this while loop. So it will ignore this while loop when this condition is not true. I've talked about that in my previous video. And so while I is less than or equal to z, it enters here and check if I is equal to argument. So whatever argument we pass when we are calling our function, let's assume we decide to pass a lowercase d as we did in our previous video. When I is equal to d, if I is equal to d, it should return 1. But if I is not equal to d, it ignores this place and comes here and increase it to I becomes I plus 1. I think let me go into the main function. When I come into the main function, you will understand better. So when you run your program, the first thing that happens is that it begins to run from your main function. So in your main function, I declared a return value variable of integer. So just as we did in the previous video, it runs this my function is lower, taking the argument lowercase d. So when it sees this function is lower, it goes and check, okay, is there anywhere, this is a function call, we've called this function, let me see, it will check, does this function exist? And to go up and see, yes, this function already exists here. It has a prototype and that's the body. So it jumps into this function and does what you've declared inside this function and continues. So let's come back to our main. Let's assume it has already gone through the function and it has done what it wants to do. When it comes back, it's going to return the value we want it to return. Now in the function, what do we say we want to return the function? We said if I is equal to the argument. So when this a becomes, it goes through this a. The first time it sees a, is a equal to d? No. It comes again and does I is equal to I plus 1. So it becomes it goes to b. That's it goes to the next integer value, which is now b. It checks, is b less than z? Yes. Is I equal to b? No. It increased to c. It checks, is c less than z? Yes. Is I equal to c? No. So it continues to do that until it gets to is d less than z? Yes. Is I equal to z? Yeah, sorry, is I equals to d? Yes. Then it returns 1. So that's just all this program is going to do. So it's going to keep going through the while loop until it sees the value, the value of the character we put in our call when we called the function, and so it will return 1 when it sees it. So that's what our function does. It returns 1 when, I just hope you understand what I'm saying, but it returns 1. So here it sees d. When it when it come across d, then it returns 1. And so when it returns 1, it's going to print the return value. So return value is, what is return value? 1, because d is a lowercase value. So it returns 1 based on the function we've written. We want our own function to return 1 if it sees this value. If it sees this value, and this value is lowercase, between lowercase a and z, is within lowercase a and z, it should return 1. And so when it returns 1, we come here inside our main function and say if the return value is 0, it should print letter is not lowercase. But if the return else, if the return value is not 0, that's meaning of this else, it should print letter is lowercase and should go to a new line. So because here our is going to return 1 because the d I passed in here is a lowercase value, is a lowercase. I passed in a lowercase d inside this function, and when it came here, it went through this while loop. It checked lowercase a, lowercase b, lowercase c, lowercase d, and see that yes, this I that has been incrementing from a to b to c to d is now equal to what I passed in d. So d is now equal to d. So it's returned 1. And when it returns 1, that means it's going to print letter is lowercase. So this is just how to define your own function. You write your function block your program, then you come to your main function and you call it. In this type, see this is the way I decided to call mine, and whatever value is returning, it stores it inside this variable return value. Now, one last thing I have to say, remember I said when defining your variable there must be a return type, and here we have our return type to be integer, and of course the our return, that's why you can see that I'm returning one, I'm returning an integer, I'm returning an integer. And so let me run the program so that you see what I have done. All right, so running this, I use gcc function2 dot c. Okay, there's an error. It's like I mistakenly typed in something, so I go back to open the file and see where the error is. Where is this error? It's like I mistakenly typed in something wrong. Where is that? Okay, look at the error here. I mistakenly put in this was not meant to be there, so let me quickly delete it. This was not meant to be there. All right, so I go back and I run the program again using gcc. I run the program, it runs successfully this time around. And so I'll just run the program by using ./a.out, and you can see the return value is actually 1 because it was a lowercase value d, and letter is lowercase. So thank you for watching this video. Kindly subscribe to this channel, click on the bell notification button to be notified whenever a new video is dropped. Share this video with your friend and like the video. Thank you.